Welcome to Through the Bible with Pastor Michael, a podcast from First Baptist Church in Mustang, Oklahoma. Here's Pastor Michael.
All right, September day 9, and we are making some progress now through the book of Job as we look at chapters 7, 8, and 9. Again, this is a lengthy book, so we're here for a while. It's going to take us a bit of time to be able to get through all of this book, about 2 weeks that we will end up being in the book of Job. But the story is beginning to unfold for us. We're getting a feel for the different characters in the book and their perspective. So 5 observations. Number 1, Job expresses his struggles and frustrations. One of the things that you see in this book, as you do in most books of the Bible, are examples of just real life responses to the struggles of life. And so in some cases you see responses of just what seems like pure faith and trust. Other times you see responses of struggle or of faith maybe that wavers a bit. And we can understand it when you think about all that Job has been through, all that he's lost, all that he has suffered, without knowing all of the answers of why. It makes sense that he would have the same questions and struggles that you and I would have. And so he begins to express those struggles and frustrations. The second thing we see is that his friend Bildad then offers his first words. And so we saw yesterday his oldest friend begin to speak and give his thoughts on the situation. And now the second friend begins to speak and give his opinions. Third, Bildad, Job's friend, accuses Job of self-righteousness. He kind of piles on Job a bit. He doubts and questions some things about Job and expresses that. Which leads, fourthly, that Job rejects Bildad's accusations. He rejects the things that Bildad assumes to be true in Job's life because of his suffering. And then fifth, Job desires his innocence to be known, and also desires a greater understanding of his situation, wants to know why this is happening. If it's not the result of direct sin or punishment for sin, he's looking for answers. Now, what do we do with this? So what's our application from these 3 specific chapters tonight? Well, one, be careful not to jump to conclusions. When someone in your life, a friend of yours, is hurting, suffering, struggling, be careful not to be too quick to jump to conclusions. We don't know everything. Now, there are times we can know something. There are times we can see how people live, how people act. There are times we can call people out and should call people out in their sin. If someone that you know is doing the wrong thing, love them enough to call them out on it. Love them enough to confront them in their sin. But be careful to not jump to conclusions that we don't know. You may look at somebody's life and think you know all the answers or have all the explanations, but we should be slow to jump to those conclusions. Number 2, remember how powerful your words are. When someone is hurting, your words can be used to give life, and your words can be used to cut deeply. Sometimes we forget just how powerful our words really are. And so we want to be careful with our words. We want to choose our words carefully, particularly when we're dealing with people who are hurting, people who are already weak, already vulnerable, already have a heart that is just heavy and burdened. So we want to, before we speak, before we address something, before we give counsel, we want to first stop and remember how powerful words truly can be. Third, be aware of times that someone hurting may never forget your words. I remember reading in a book years ago, tragedy had struck a family, and the father, whose family had had this horrific tragedy, was speaking to his son, who had inadvertently um, done something that just caused unimaginable pain and suffering. It wasn't sin, it wasn't purposeful, it wasn't deliberate in any way, but his actions brought much pain and suffering. The father, knowing how much his son was hurting from what was happening, looked at his son uh, when he first saw him and said, "Your dad loves you." That was so impactful to me. I've never forgotten it. Um, there haven't been a lot of times in my life where I have been in the situation where I knew right then that what I said or how I responded to somebody might be words that they would never forget. But there have been a couple of times. I don't know if those ended up being times they've never forgotten or not. But there have been a couple of times where I have been in a situation where somebody either has been in a lot of trouble or someone has done something really, really wrong, or someone is just hurting and grieving, not because of something they did wrong, but because of maybe some tragedy that has just happened. And I've tried to always stop and say to myself, look, it's not about coming up with some kind of, you know, great speech or some kind of magical line that they will attribute to me years later. It's not about that. It is about knowing that right now, in this moment, um, what they've experienced is so painful, so raw, so real, so gut wrenching. It may be that what I say right now will be words they will never forget either way. And so there have been a few times where I've thought that way and thought I want to make sure what I say is gracious, is Christ centered, um, and are words that I wouldn't regret if they did remember this forever. And so whether it is, um, a friend of yours that's hurting, whether it is a church member who has found themselves in a real bind, whether it's someone in your family who has done something um, that is brought pain upon their life, whatever it may be aware as best you can of those times when someone hurting may never forget your words. As a parent, your children may come to you um, and tell you about something terrible they've done, or something terrible that's happened to them, or some real big fear they have, or something very traumatic that they're going through. And in those moments, because of how they feel, it may be that 40 years from now, they will still remember that your words either cut them and wounded them, or that your words were something the Lord used to strengthen them and to help them. Of course, as a parent, we've got to discipline our kids. We've got to teach our kids. We have to correct our kids. Part of discipline includes punishment. And so we've got to deal with their actions, their words, their sin. But there are some moments where when somebody, whether suffering or even if they've done something really wrong and they know it, that your first words are words that will ring in their mind, ring in their heart for the rest of their life. And so I think as best we can, we want to be aware of that and watch our words and guard our words and let our words be gracious, truthful, but compassionate, like we talked about yesterday, and words that would be ultimately helpful for them as they work through whatever situation they're in. Fourth, faith must learn to live without all the answers. We see that in the reading today. That's an application for us too. Our faith in Christ, our trust in the Lord has to learn to operate without knowing all the answers. If we can only be faithful when we understand everything, if we can only be obedient when we know the results of everything, then we're not living by faith. There are times where we just simply don't know the truth, or don't know all the answers, or don't know the full part of the story. And in those moments, we still walk by faith and not by sight, even when we don't know all the answers. And then a fifth application, be quick to listen and slow to speak. The words from James chapter 1 are so helpful and so instructive for us. Be quick to listen, be slow to speak. In the context of Job, when someone's suffering, don't feel the need to walk in and answer every question. Don't feel the need to even go in and make sense of everything. Don't feel the need to go in and say something to take away all of the pain of the moment. We can't do that, but we can be quick to listen. We can sit there with our friend, with our spouse, with our children, with our parents, and we can be present. We can listen to them. We can let them know that we love them. Let them know that we're there for them. We can be quick to listen and be slow to speak. There's a time to talk. There's a time to give answers. There's a time to respond. There's a time to try to help people make sense of what they're facing. There's a time to try to give people truth that addresses their situation. But be quick to listen and slow to speak. Now, there's a reason why the Scripture cautions us in that way. And so we want our words to be careful, our words to be guarded, and many times our words to be few, as we would be quick to listen and slow to speak. Summary, we are through with Psalm 119, moving on to Psalm 120. We summarize it this way: in days of distress, cry out to God. In days of distress, cry out to God. And it may be with a broken heart, with a confused heart, maybe with a broken heart, with a heart that just doesn't understand, with a heart and a mind that's heavy. That's how you feel. If that's where you are, cry out to God. In your days of distress, let your first response be to God. Turn to His Word. Turn to Him in prayer. There's a place to get counsel. There's a place to get help. There's a time to talk to friends. There's a time to gather, people around you and hear from them. But let your first response in your day of distress be to call out to God, cry out to God, and ultimately to trust in Him, whatever you're facing and whatever struggle may be in front of you.